Hello, everybody. Crafting Journey here with an episode of Crafting and Crime Daily, the show where I recap live trials. Except there's not a new trial. The last one that ended was the Scott Peterson trial. It ended while I was on vacation, and I did put up a short about that trial. Yes, they found him not guilty on all counts, which I am so happy about because I think it was such an unnecessary proceeding against him. Um, the allegations were just, in my opinion, ridiculous. And I know that there's other people out there that have feelings, strong feelings the other way, and you're entitled. That's okay. That's just my opinion. Okay. So when there's another live trial, I'll start to cover it. Now, there is a trial going on now, but it involves a child, and I do try to stay away from children when I can, but in the case of like Chad Dorman, and this case that I'm going to talk about today, it does involve children. So if you're not comfortable with that, then this is probably not the show that you want to watch. I usually do these shows on Saturday, but because I haven't picked up a new trial yet, we're going to talk about it today. And there's a lot to talk about. This is the case of Lucy Letby. Now, before we get to Lucy Letby, I do want to tell you, I am going to talk about the retreat, but it's going to be tonight on my Craft With Me Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. I will be live with my sisters, Jen from DP Addiction Adventures, Tia from Tia's Crazy Craft Addictions, and Ashley from Crafts with Crashly. They will all be on my live, but you can catch them on their channel too. We're going to broadcast on all 4 channels. It's going to be start at 7:30 p.m. tonight, and it'll run till we run out of stories. So please, or till Jude, decides he's going to cry and Jen has to run rescue. I got to meet Jude. He's 9 months old, and he's adorable. Crawling, not walking, but he likes to stand up, and he likes for you to hold his fingers while he walks. Yeah. All right, enough about that. He was so cute. All right, let's talk about Lucy Letby. Now, Lucy Letby is accused of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 10 others. She faces 22 charges in connection with those murders and attempted murders. This is all taking place in the UK. She worked for the NHS at the Countess of Chester Hospital in their neonatal intensive care unit. I can't talk today. In their neonatal intensive care unit. So this case started, when did it start? Last year. It's been going on for 9 months. 9 months. Now, not straight. They took off time for the holidays. Every time something goes on with a juror's life, they take time off. For example, there was a death in the family of one of the jurors. They took the time off. Yeah. Now, here in the U.S., we would just dismiss them and replace them with an alternate and keep on going. You need to keep things moving. And one of the reasons is because these judges have multiple cases on their docket, and they've got to move those cases along. Otherwise, you've got people, potentially innocent people, sitting in jail because they can't afford bail, waiting for their case to come to trial. I don't know how that plays out in the UK. I don't know why there's no sense of urgency to get the trial completed. I don't know. In any case, even if this had been tried in the US, if this was a similar case in the US, it probably would have taken several months because of the complexity of the case, the number of victims in the case. And you would have had, because each murder or attempted murder is a separate charge. So what the prosecution did was walk the jury through each and every baby. Now, the babies are not named in this case for legal reasons and privacy reasons, so the parents are not named either. They are called baby A through baby Q. This happened between June of 2015 and June of 2016, after which they started catching on that it could possibly be Lucy Letby. So all of the evidence is in. I need some coffee. Oh my. Oh, I just hit the microphone. So sorry. Now, do y'all hear when I drink coffee? Here, hold on. You don't need to hear that. Okay. So this is taking place in the Manchester Crown Court in Manchester, England. Now, Countess of Chester Hospital was a level 2 neonatal intensive care nursery, not the highest level. So they could take babies in that were very, very sick, that might have been born there and unexpectedly had complications or were premature. But if there was an anticipation that those babies were not going to recover within 48 hours, they should have been transferred to a higher level of care, a level 3 neonatal intensive care nursery that is designed to and has the staffing and the people with the wherewithal and the knowledge to take care of these babies on a long-term basis. So in any case, Lucy Letby, she is a neonatal intensive care nurse. She's highly trained. She went to college specifically to be a nurse, to work with babies. She interned at this same hospital, the Countess of Chester Hospital. And as her attorney points out, she worked for years with these babies prior to these murders that started to happen. And here's what changed. The prosecution says, here's what changed. The prosecution says that 2 weeks before the death of baby A, there was a course on IV fluids. And part of that course was sort of a chapter on air embolism and air getting into the line of the IV. So the prosecution said, oh, this is when Lucy came up with the idea. Because in this course, they talk about how dangerous that air is when it gets into the baby. It can kill them. So this is when Lucy started planning these murders. Now, according to the defense, what changed is the neonatal intensive care nursery at the Countess of Chester Hospital started taking in babies that they really could not care for, that they couldn't offer the highest level of care for. In other words, a higher acuity. But they never changed their staffing levels. So they had the same amount of staff. They were taking in more and more babies and keeping them and not transferring them out. And explains why these babies collapsed and died. I don't know. I honestly don't know how I would, like, what, as a juror, I don't know what I would do. I really don't at this point. I'm not convinced, in other words. There's a lot of coincidences. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the prosecution talked about, patterns and coincidences, because every bit of evidence against Lucy Letby is circumstantial. Look, I bought a new pen. It's blue with like a pink hue to it. It has pink butterflies inside. Anyway, I know, I digress. All right, so some of the coincidences or patterns involve these rashes. Several of these 17 babies had this mysterious rash that were described by doctors and nurses as this purple blotchy. It would move around, something they had never experienced before or after these babies collapsed. Then there were collapses that centered around significant milestones. And I'm calling them collapses because that's what they call them in the UK. Here in the US, we say they crashed. She crashed and died. Over there, they call them collapses. So we're just going to go with their terminology. So significant milestones like 100th day of life, the day that, Father's Day, the day they were supposed to go home, the day they had immunizations, significant dates in these babies' lives. Then there was several babies that were described as screaming. I rarely describe a baby's cry as screaming. Now, there are babies that scream. They have that. We used to have the cocaine babies. Well, I guess I was a NICU nurse, and some of these cocaine babies had very high-pitched cries that you might describe as screaming. But in any case, some of these 17 babies had this high-pitched screaming that the parents or the nursing staff would hear. Then there were these several incidences of some of these babies having blood in their throats. And the prosecution's theory is that either some very stiff tubing was forced down the throat of these babies, or maybe a medical instrument. They don't know. Something that injured the baby's airway. Then there were several that were victims of opportunity. Either the nurse that was assigned to take care of the baby had stepped out, maybe to help another nurse or take their break, and the baby would collapse. Or the parents were there and the parents stepped away, maybe to pick up their kids from school, go back to their rooms, or whatever. The babies would collapse. Then there were the babies that would make these miraculous recoveries once the CPR began or once they were transferred to a higher level of care. And then the prosecution said that there was so much inappropriate behavior on behalf of Lucy Letby after these babies died. And all of these things, taken alone probably don't sound like a big deal, but when you talk about how they happened in several different instances, it kind of points, circumstantial evidence points towards Lucy Letby. What the prosecution did was take the schedules of every nurse in this case and compared them with the collapses of the babies. And the only common denominator of all 17 babies was Lucy Letby. She was either on the shift, coming on the shift, had just left the shift. She was the common denominator. All 22 events. 22 events. There was no other nurse that had anywhere near the connections that Lucy Letby had. Maybe 3 connections at most. She had some kind of connection to every single one of these babies. So let's talk about the first thing, the air embolus. Now, what is an air embolus? This is when air gets into the baby's bloodstream. And it's been portrayed in movies, where they take it, the victim will take a syringe full of air and they'll inject it into themselves to try to commit suicide, or someone will sneak into the hospital room with a syringe and they'll inject some air into the line and the person will die. So it is a thing. Prosecution was relying on experts to testify that that's why these babies died, because they experienced an air embolism. And he talked about how the hallmark of one of these I can't say it 3 times fast. The hallmark of these air embolisms is this rash. So they were relying on a paper. This is something the defense pointed out. They were relying on a paper that was written over 30 years ago that said 1 in 5 babies that suffers an air embolus will have this weird rash. But in this case, they said it happened to both baby A, who passed away, the twin baby B, who survived. It also happened to baby D, E, I, and O, who all died. But it happened in baby M, J, and baby B. Those babies survived. All of those babies suffered air embolisms. That's a huge coincidence that you would have all of these babies having air embolisms within a span of a year. Yeah. So they all had this purpley, blotchy look to it, rash, and the doctors and nurses testified it was something that they had never witnessed this kind of a rash before. Okay, then we have this significant dates coincidence. So baby D, their collapse was on Father's Day in June of 2015. Baby G had multiple collapses. The first one was on his 100th day of life he collapsed. I mean, they had put up banners, baked a cake. They were going to have a big celebration, and the baby collapses that day. And Lucy Letby was on the shift when the baby collapsed, um, to the point where this baby had a severe brain injury. The baby survived, but severely brain injured. Then the baby G collapsed again on his due date, mom's actual due date, which is another significant milestone in a baby's life. The baby collapsed on that day. Then there were other babies that collapsed on the day that they were immunized or the day that they were scheduled to go home. Or they were scheduled to go home very shortly in time to when they collapsed. So then we talk about blood in the throat. So this was baby C, baby G, baby N, baby E, and baby H. 5 babies who the medical staff saw blood in their throat. 3 of those babies died. The other ones survived, and it's alleged that at least like for example, a baby N, they couldn't get that baby intubated. Now, just the fact that they were trying to intubate that baby could have caused some kind of injury to the baby's airway. And when they couldn't get baby N intubated, they brought a specialist, I can't talk, a specialty team in from another hospital, and that specialist was able to intubate that baby on the first try. So the defense on their closing pointed out that this was because the caregivers were working beyond their scope of training. Then the baby's screaming at or near the time of the collapses. I've heard screaming babies, usually the cocaine babies. Those are the ones that have this high-pitched cry. But most of the time, when babies cry, you don't describe it as screaming, like they're being injured. And that was described in baby N, baby D, baby E, and baby I. Then the prosecution described Lucy Letby as an opportunist, that she was... she would wait till the right time, like when nurses had stepped away from their assignment and leaving the baby alone, maybe with another nurse watching from a distance. And these are the babies, you do that with stable babies. They're on a monitor, the monitor's going to alarm if something goes on. But baby N and baby I collapsed while their nurse was stepped out, either helping someone else or they'd gone to the bathroom, gone to lunch. Then babies N, O, P, H, and M all collapsed when their parents had left the bedside. So, an opportunist. Then there were babies that made miraculous recoveries. Baby M, they resuscitated baby M for 30 minutes. The doctors were ready to call it. They were ready to say, okay, stop CPR, time of death. The baby, all of a sudden, circulation returned. Baby started breathing, recovered. The doctor described it as an inexplicable recovery. Then there were several that improved within a very short time of being transferred to another level of care, a higher level of care. So then the prosecution talked about the bizarre behavior of Lucy Letby. For example, with baby C, the parents had made the tough decision to stop resuscitation. No more, because the baby had collapsed a few times. So they stopped resuscitation. They gave the parents the baby to cuddle with in a private room until the baby died. Lucy kept going in and out of that room to the point where the supervisor had said, you don't have any business in there. Stay out of that room. She went in one time with a cart and she said, hey, you've said your goodbyes. Put the baby here. What? The baby hadn't even died. So then there was baby I. They said she was smiling at the parents when they were bathing the baby after their baby eye died. They were giving the baby a little bath. And she has this bizarre behavior, smiling. Then with baby P, after he died, a day later than his triplet, baby O, she says, hey, let me make you a memory book. She had made one for baby O. And that she was described as being animated and excited. So the prosecution ended up by saying, if it had not been for the sabotage of Lucy Letby, babies A, C, D, E, I, O, and P, all 7 would have gone home with their parents. And babies B, F, G, H, J, K, L, M, N, and Q would not have been injured. So the prosecution began their closing arguments, which took another 4 days. They described that the prosecution was asking the jury to presume their client is guilty and that she couldn't win. No matter what they say she did or didn't do, they're accusing her of being guilty, whether she's present at the collapses, not present at the collapses, whether she signed off on her observations, whether she didn't sign off on her observations, whether there were signs of deterioration, whether there were no signs of deterioration, whether she cried at the witness stand, whether she didn't cry on the witness stand. All these point towards her guilt. She can't win. He says what my client is a very dedicated nurse. She's a neonatal intensive care nurse who loved what she was doing, who studied, went to college. She studied to become a neonatal intensive care nurse. And she was young. She was flexible. She didn't have children. She wasn't married. And she lived on the campus till the very end part of the deaths, where she moved into a house. But for the most part, she had a dorm on the premises. So she'd say, okay, I'll volunteer for another shift. These are the ones you gotta watch out for. I'm just gonna tell you, as a risk manager, you always want to watch out for the person that's volunteering, goes to every code, just sort of happens to be around when something happens or something goes missing. These are the ones you want to look at. They talked about how the defense talked about how the prosecution is pointing out these searches of these parents on Facebook. He says there was 31 searches, only 31 searches related to the parents of these babies, out of 2,300 social media searches that Lucy Letby did. And many of those searches were for children that weren't involved in this case. She just liked to check up on how those babies were doing. Then he talked about the handover sheets that were found in her residence. Over 250 handover sheets. Those are the sheets where, you take whatever it is you like to do, a notebook, and you write down significant things that the nurse who is going off duty is going to tell you about her assignment, so that you know what's been going on with these babies, what you need to do during your shift. Usually you dispose of those before you leave. She had all of hers saved at her home. Well, the defense says it's because she collected paper. She didn't like to throw away paper. Not a collector like a stamp collector or, antiques. She just didn't want to throw out paper. She never threw paper out. That's weird. I'm sorry. That's just weird. Okay. Then he talked about this gang of 4, these 4 physicians who they believe conspired to blame her to cover up their own failings and their own inability to work on this NICU. With respect to the babies with the rashes, he said, the prosecution is relying on this paper that's 30 years old. You can't rely on that as scientific evidence that's why these babies have rashes. Because 30 years ago, someone said that 1 in 5 babies who have air embolism will have this rash. He says that's just not good evidence of her guilt. So he went through each and every baby pointing out how they got suboptimal care. For example, he said baby A, there was a delay of over 4 hours in administering fluids to this baby. He also mentioned that the rash that was identified on this baby that was testified to by these doctors, the rash was never notated in anybody's notes. It's something they came up with years later. Then he talked about baby B, how it took about Dr. 5 attempts to get this baby intubated, and that the baby's collapse was a consequence of being premature. Same thing with baby C. He said this was a very tiny baby that was born with pneumonia, and that the doctors and nurses were slow to react to changes in the baby's condition, and recognize issues that would point toward this baby needing to be transferred to a higher level of care. He talked about baby D, who was the only full-term baby involved, how mom should have been started on antibiotics before the baby was delivered, and then there was a delay in the baby getting antibiotics, even though the baby started showing signs of deterioration at 12 minutes of age, because the baby was born with pneumonia. I can't talk today. Then with baby E, he said there was a failure to intubate the baby in a timely fashion and a failure to give blood transfusion to this baby. Now, the reason the baby needed a blood transfusion is because Lucy damaged the baby's throat, did something to the baby's throat. This was another one of the babies that was screaming. Then with respect to baby F, it's supposedly died of insulin that was injected into the fluid. He said there was no evidence that Lucy Letby was anywhere near that bag of fluid and would have had the chance to eject it. Now, in order for someone to do this in a neonatal intensive care setting, they've got to go get the insulin. You've got to get a syringe. You've got to go get the insulin out of the refrigerator, draw it up, and then put it into a bag. Now, the PAR level on this unit was 12 bags of fluid. If she had injected it into the bag in that room where the insulin was, how did she know that fluid was going to go to which baby? Or did she care? I don't know. But she certainly could have done it at the bedside and no one could have ever noticed. Just put it in. He said with respect to one of the babies, it would have had to have had insulin injected into 4 different bags over 53 hours for it to be associated with Lucy. It would be very tenuous. So he went through each baby, pointing out the suboptimal care, and how they either recovered miraculously when they got the care that they were supposed to get. He described them all as being very, very fragile babies. How even some of the mothers should have been transferred prior to the babies even being born in this hospital. And that some of these signs were very subtle, but they were there. One of the things he pointed out, there was a doctor in one of the events that actually saw Lucy standing at the bedside right before the baby collapsed, and he went into the room, and he said she was just standing there, not doing anything. And at this point, he said he had already suspected Lucy of being the person behind all of this, but he never reported this event. He never called police. He didn't tell administration. These doctors were sitting on this information for a year. So then there was a baby who had hemophilia. He said that didn't get their needed medication for over 2 weeks. They had to get it from another hospital. So he goes on and on about these other babies. He said most of these events were taken out of context, and no, Lucy didn't cry on the stand like you think she should have, but that doesn't mean she's guilty. She's just socially awkward. Okay. And that these were coincidences, just that coincidences. No one ever saw Lucy Letby harming a baby or attempting to murder a baby. What do you think? So now the judge is spending his time summarizing the case. It was thought that this case would get to a jury by July 4th, which was yesterday. So he is on day 3 of summarizing the case for the jury, and then they'll get the case to deliberate. So I'll keep you posted if we have a verdict. I'll let you know when they start deliberating and when we get a verdict. God knows how long it's going to take them to sift through all of these babies and all of this information. And they're going to, there's going to be a verdict form for each charge, each of the 22 charges, the 7 attempted murders, or the 7 murders, and all the other attempted murders of the 10 babies. So stay tuned. Guys, have a wonderful Wednesday. I hope to see you tonight in Craft With Me Wednesday. It's actually not going to be a Craft With Me Wednesday. It's going to be my friends Tia, Crazy Craft Addictions, Jan from DP Addiction Adventures, Crafts with Croshley, and myself, and we're going to talk about some fun that we had at the retreat. So hope to see you then. It'll be at 7:30 Central Time. Take care. Bye.